You've probably heard me mention once or twice on the channel that the Primarchs are returning to Warhammer 40k. This is a big deal for many reasons. The Space Marines are getting their dads back, the Champions of Chaos now have enemies to fear, but one of my favourite reasons is that with the return of more and more Primarchs, we are going to see more and more of the Emperor's war gear. We found this out when the Lion returned, and the designers at Games Workshop told us so.
A big part of the model is that shield that he's holding. I had this idea that it would be really cool for the loyalist Primarchs to inherit one item from their dad's armory. So we decided that that should be the Emperor's shield.
If you look at the design on the shield, it's a single-headed eagle, which represents the Emperor, with a serpent in his mouth, representing evil, chaos, or Horus himself.
Like the Emperor's suit of armour, it's absolutely over the top.
I thought this was a really cool reveal to throw in there. And it makes a lot of sense to me because, as we've talked about a lot on this channel, the Emperor of Mankind is influencing things far more than he ever did before now in Warhammer 40k. Not necessarily more than when he led the Great Crusade, just the most since he became a battery. So for today's Warhammer Investigations, for which I stream every Wednesday, I thought we would take a look at the Emperor's war gear, or the war gear that we know about, look at where it is, who has it, and then have a talk about what piece of war gear should all of the Primarchs get. To start off with, let's talk about the Emperor's sword. This is probably the most powerful weapon the Emperor of Mankind ever wielded, and it belongs, of course, to Rabute Guilliman nowadays. However, I do have to do a slight caveat here, because there's been a bit of a change to this lore. So in the modern Warhammer 40k story, Guilliman actually picked up the sword in the Scouring. He carried it with him through the Scouring. It was placed in stasis with him. However, if you look at older lore and older pictures, you may notice that sometimes it's noted that the sword lay across the Emperor's knees. This appears to have been retconned. Likewise, there was a story where Belisarius Cawl went and found the sword on an ice planet. So I just thought I'd mention that in case you come across any canon conflicts, but I will say the lore has been pretty consistent for 3 or 4 years that Guilliman has had it all along. Now that Guilliman is back in Warhammer 40k, we have seen the Emperor's sword be incredibly powerful. It is one of the strongest weapons in the galaxy. The main thing that we see it do is be able to permanently kill all but the greatest demons. So Kugarth Plaguemaster and Mortarion have a conversation in the book Plague War, where Kugarth actually says to Mortarion that the Emperor's sword in Guilliman's hand could kill the Primarch of the Death Guard. Now, it's worth noting that Mortarion doesn't actually believe this, and so it's not actually confirmed whether it officially could kill something as powerful as Mortarion, but certainly it is strong enough to kill a greater demon, and I'm actually going to play that scene for you now.
"We cannot be destroyed," said Septicus. "We are of the warp." He swung his sword back at Guilliman. The Primarch battered it away with the Gauntlet of Dominion. Septicus could not beat the Avenging Sun. All he had to do was hold him off for long enough until his body disintegrated and his soul could escape. He could feel it going, feel the fetters of corporeality loosening around his spirit. By his will, he hastened the process, laughing in anticipation at the look on the Primarch's face when he slipped from his reach. "You cannot win. Galatan comes." He pointed a weeping hand up to the sky. As the fog sped away, a vast shape loomed. "Typhus is here. You may slaughter us all like swine, but you cannot bring that down. We are Legion. We can never be destroyed." "Maybe not," said Rabute Guilliman, "but I can make a start with you." The Emperor's sword burned bright. Septicus shrank back from its blowtorch roar. His eyes shriveled in his head, their jelly running in thick tears down his face. He never saw the blow that ended him. The fires of the sword doused themselves in his guts. Septicus looked down sightlessly at the weapon buried up to its hilt in his heart. "And when you are driven from this universe," said Guilliman, "I shall purge yours also, until the warp is purified and calm comes again to the minds of humanity, though you shall never see it." No chronicle would mark Septicus's last words as worthy, "But," was all he said. Shouting, Guilliman ripped the sword of the Emperor up through Septicus's disintegrating body, cutting through softening ribs, cooking rancid organs, slicing multiple chins and his skull, until it burst from the top of Septicus's head in a shower of gore. Blackness exploded from the slain demon. Guilliman's sword flared bright again, driving it into shadow and out of existence. The light of the Emperor burned Septicus away forever.
So Guilliman now has the ability to literally permanently kill demons, and although Mortarion is pretty confident that he would be able to survive being stabbed by Daddy's sword, I do imagine that most of the demon Primarchs are at least concerned with this, and they're probably pretty wary about taking on Guilliman at this point in time. Or at least they would be if Guilliman didn't keep dying in the lore. The other thing that we see the sword do in the Dark Imperium trilogy is in the book Godblight, when Guilliman is actually killed by Mortarion and then resurrected as the power of the Emperor flows through him. It's a very long story and something I've done a video on before, but essentially the power of the Emperor seems to have been able to flow from the Emperor, either on the throne or the part of the Emperor's soul in the warp, into these librarians who have conducted this ritual, which goes into Guilliman and then out of the sword, and from the Emperor's sword, the Garden of Nurgle is burned. And this was a horrific blow for the Plague God. He was furious at this loss. Remember that demons are part of gods. And so when they are killed, the god is technically weakened a small bit. And although the warp is timeless, so it's not going to impact their influence on the galaxy right now, it has weakened Nurgle in the Great Game. And so this has been a warning to all of the Chaos Gods that reality is striking back. And Guilliman is the perfect man to do so. As you saw in that scene, Guilliman is very intent on not only kind of taking the fight to the demons, but he has actually promised the Plague God that he will kill Nurgle. So the Emperor's sword is incredibly strong. The Master of Mankind himself permanently slew thousands of demons with it, and it is now wielded by the Lord Commander of the Imperium. So let's move on to the second piece of the Emperor's war gear that I wanted to talk about, and that is, of course, the Emperor's shield. So this, as we know, is in the hands of Lionel Johnson, and in my opinion, it was a pretty clever choice by the designers. So as you can see from this artwork of the Emperor, originally it was just a tilting shield that the Master of Mankind used. However, it is now a massive kite shield wielded by the Primarch of the Dark Angels. And this kind of demonstrates the fact that the Emperor's war gear, although it is physical, there's definitely physical parts to the Emperor's war gear, there's a huge psyche component. And that's very obvious because, of course, the size of the shield has grown so much. And in the hands of Lionel Johnson, this shield is not just decorative, it is incredibly powerful. He gets the shield during his novel Lionel Johnson, Son of the Forest. There's a part of Mirror Caliban that the lion has been warned not to enter by the Watchers in the Dark. Eventually, throughout the journeys, the lion starts to regain his memories and power. He feels confident enough to go into this part of Mirror Caliban, and he takes on a shape-shifting demon. Again, something we've looked at in a live stream if you're interested. It takes on the form of all of the lion's brothers, and the lion has to fight all of them one by one. He eventually defeats the demon, but during the conflict, he actually discovers this shield which has been left there. It's not entirely clear how the shield got there. To me, I infer that the Emperor somehow psychically sent this shield into Mirror Caliban for the lion to kind of retrieve when he's ready. So we've actually got the scene where the lion finds the shield. This is a pretty big moment in the novel, as this is basically the part where the lion reconnects with the Emperor.
The light he saw from outside flares up again from the wall behind him. He turns and sees it emanating from a kite shield which hangs there. It is richly decorated and embossed with an icon of an eagle crowned with laurels. The lion reaches for it, and as his fingers touch it, fire, fury. He stands on a battlefield with the shield on his arm under a dark sky. But he can see all the stars, and he knows their names, and he can feel everything around him. All the humans hurting and bleeding and dying. All the Xenos, those abominations, and all the tiny creatures burrowing through the soil, and the trees and the grass and the wind. He can feel it all. It is all connected. A web of power. And this is not overwhelming. This is just how he lives instant to instant to instant. The lion staggers. The shield is on his arm. He knows the touch of that mind. He has felt it before. Father.
This shield is incredibly powerful. So to give some context on how we know just how strong it is, in Arcs of Omen Angron actually destroys a planet with one of his blows because he strikes the planet at the right time, and it's got like the power of Khorne behind him at that moment. It's a very long story, but basically Angron's blow is so strong, technically it destroyed a planet. However, when the lion and Angron fight, the lion is able to just take blow after blow from Angron. When you strike the Emperor's shield, it bursts back with like this psychic force. And so sometimes when the lion and Angron are fighting, as Angron delivers a blow down on the Primarch of the Dark Angels, he will be sent reeling just by the psychic backlash of the shield. So it's quite interesting that the shield and sword have gone to the lion and Guilliman, because you might think these would go the other way. Because the lion is the duelist. The Emperor actually refers to him as the duelist. And Guilliman is not known for his defense, but certainly he's not like the most lethal combatant. So you might think a shield might go better with Guilliman, but it's quite interesting, and I think he's kind of shored up some of the weaknesses of the Primarchs. You know, Guilliman is now an absolute menace. The Demon Primarchs will be very concerned about taking him on because he's got this monstrous weapon. And likewise, the lion is far slower in his novel than he was before. However, with the shield, he's actually able to kind of compensate for that and easily take on someone like Angron, which, you know, hand to hand, he's not going to be able to survive a blow of Angron, given the strength of the blood god flowing through him. But yeah, it was always quite interesting to me that those two kind of went the other way around. So up next, let's talk about the armour of the Emperor, or the one true armour, as it is often referred to. It was said that the armour of the Emperor was cut up and distributed amongst the Loyalist legions, who then used tiny parts of the Emperor's armour in pauldrons in the Crux Terminatus for Terminator armour. And this supposedly has granted those Terminator plates with even more protection. We actually see this discussed in the book Pandarax, when Azrael, the chapter master of the Dark Angels, and Drago, the Grand Master of the Grey Knights, they talk, and Azrael actually explains to Drago just how powerful this makes the Dark Angels Terminators, the Deathwing. However, Drago is a little bit smug, as you will see.
Brother Gabriel's armour is the most ancient of all the Deathwing suits, forged upon the anvils of the rock in the days when the Emperor was already interred upon the throne, but the legions had not yet been divided. From Terra came a gift to all those legions who had remained loyal in the face of Horus's perfidy, a section of the Emperor's own armour, so that it may be incorporated into the newly forged Terminator suits of his true sons. The Dark Angels took delivery of the Emperor's right gauntlet, and over the coming decades, 1,000 suits of armour were fashioned, incorporating metal from his battleplate in the pauldrons. Many of those suits were gifted to our noble successors when Lords Dawn and Guilliman broke the Space Marines down into smaller chapters, and though most have been lost down the millennia, some of our brothers still go to battle in armour bearing the original Crux Terminatus. Drago did not think it would be appropriate to point out to his Dark Angel's counterpart that all Grey Knight Cruxes held a shard of the one true armour. Nor did he think the time right to challenge Azrael's use of the word brother rather than cousin when referring to the Dark Angel's successors. Azrael held the shell between his thumb and forefinger and held it up. This shell is bound with a portion of the gauntlet that struck down Horus. Just as it laid low the arch-traitor, so too will it eradicate this putrid scion of the Plague God.
So that scene always makes me laugh. The relationship between Drago and Azrael is quite funny, just as like a side point. So in that scene, when Azrael calls the successors brother and Drago says, oh, you should be calling them cousin, the reason for that is because Azrael is commanding the Unforgiven in Warhammer 40k, which he shouldn't do because the successor chapters should be split off from the first found chapter. That's kind of the whole point. And so technically Azrael kind of breaks the rules by doing this, but their relationship is quite hilarious. As you can imagine, the Dark Angels who keep loads of secrets and the Grey Knights who find out and discover secrets don't really get along very well. At the end of the book, there's a really funny scene where Drago actually punches Azrael in the face. And the reason he does that is because he thinks Azrael has taken prisoner an ancient Grey Knight who was once a Dark Angel called Epimetheus. However, Azrael didn't do this. It was actually Abaddon. And so Azrael has no idea why the chapter master of the Grey Knights has just punched him in the face. And it's quite a funny scene. Thank you so much to the people joining the channel. You absolute legends. Do feel free to join the Discord, and there is extra content as well. Check that out. So for a very long time, that's been the lore around the bulk of the Emperor's armor, that it was cut up and bits of it have been put into all these Terminators. However, people are now wondering whether this lore might be retconned. I wouldn't say it's above being retconned because, you know, there's only so much of the Emperor's armor that can go around. Likewise, specifically, I actually question whether that tiny piece of lore around the right gauntlet going to the Dark Angels will change. Because one of the things we find out in the End and the Death, Volume 1, is that Auramite is a very specific material that is used to make the Emperor's armor. And that is because it allows the Emperor to use the warp more easily than if he used like ceramite, for example. And only when the Emperor really needs to like grab the warp and literally kind of rip magic out of the warp would he actually take off his gloves. And so I actually can't help but wonder whether these gauntlets will be one of the things passed to Loyalist Primarchs. Because I strongly have the suspicion that when we see Loyalist Primarchs return to the fold, we will see them come back with psychic powers. So for example, the Lion has his forest walking ability. Corvus Corax, as we know, has got loads of the powers of the Raven Guard, and he's now very psychically powerful. But I also think Primarchs like Jagatai Khan, Leman Russ, I could totally see them having developed like strong warp abilities over the last 10,000 years. And so I can't help but wonder whether the gauntlets would actually be a very good prize for some of the Loyalist Primarchs. So I will say, when looking at the Emperor's armor, there are a couple of things to also bear in mind. There are pieces of armor and weapons that were used by the Emperor that weren't used very often. However, we do have records of him using them. So for example, it is said that the Emperor had a bolter. So we have got very old artwork of the Emperor where he does wield a bolter. And additionally, we have things like the Apollonian spear and the Dionysian spear. These were spears forged by the Emperor himself. You can see the Dionysian spear here wielded by Leman Russ. The Apollonian spear was wielded by Constantine Valdor. And so it's implied that the Emperor did use these spears, at least for a while, before he gifted them to his Primarch and Captain General of his Custodian Guard. So this might count as the gift that Leman Russ gets from the Emperor in Warhammer 40k, because he does technically have a weapon of the Emperor's in the form of the spear. However, very interestingly, Leman Russ never really liked this weapon. He actually felt that basically it always kind of looked at him weirdly and he hated using it. And it is the focus of a book called Wolfsbane, where he actually stabs Horus Lupercal, and when he stabs Horus Lupercal, Lupercal has truths revealed to him, and so his insanity is cured temporarily. The Apollonian spear of Constantine Valdor goes the other way, so when you get stabbed by Constantine Valdor's spear, Valdor finds out a truth about you, and so he, for example, can learn demons' names when he stabs them. But I do think that Leman Russ will probably get something else in addition, and the reason I think this is because technically, like, all of the Primarchs did get gifts from the Emperor during the Great Crusade. The lantern from Mortarion, the Lion Sword, is a gift from the Emperor. That is not something made by the Emperor, but it was something that was in his armory. And so I can't help but wonder whether the Dionysian Spear counts, is basically what I'm getting at. And I think it probably won't do. I think we'll probably see more. So I think that, of all of the things that we know where they kind of ended up, I think that's all of that covered. However, there are a few more pieces of the Emperor's war gear that we don't know about. We don't know where these pieces ended up. So, for example, we have the claw, we have the cloak, we have things like the tabards even, the pauldrons perhaps, we've got the gauntlets, as I say. And so this, therefore, begs the question, who's getting what? Who's getting what out of the Primarchs? All of the Primarchs are going to come back at some point, the loyalist ones, at least the ones that aren't, officially dead. And so who is going to get what? There are some things I think that lend relatively easy to the conversation. So Rogel Dawn, for example, is said to have lost his hand when he disappeared. So that, to me, it would probably make sense to give Rogel Dawn the claw of the Emperor, because he needs a hand. I have no better way of saying it than that. And so I'm very curious to know what you guys think, and I thought that would take me into kind of the Q&A session of today. Another piece of the Emperor's war gear that I thought would be really interesting to talk about is his cloak. However, the main thing cloaks are generally associated with is like stealth and hiding from people, which is absolutely something that the Emperor's cloak I think would afford you. So the Emperor is a trickster. I think if he was ever to become a warp god, he'd probably be like the god of tricks or something, like a chaos version of Kegarak, because Horus Lupercal continually is infuriated by the fact that the Emperor is a trickster. But the irony of that is that when the Emperor finally defeats his first found son, he actually does trick Horus Lupercal when he convinces Horus that he is Garvior Loken. So we do have a loyalist Primarch who does love stealth himself, and that Primarch is Corvus Corax. So I want to say that Corvus should get the cloak. The only thing about that is that Corvus can't really get any better when it comes to stealth. Corvus already has the ability to basically turn invisible. And so he can make himself invisible in the eyes of others. There's technically a small area where he can still be picked up by an automatic scanner, for example. But I don't really think Corvus needs a stealth boost. So yeah, I guess my question is for you guys, what do you think is going to happen? Who do you think is going to get what from the Emperor's armory? I think when the Lion returned, I was pretty impressed, because that was quite an innovative way to give the Lion a shield, use the kite shield to make a full shield. And so I can't help but look at pictures of the Emperor now, at least look at the old pictures, and think like, what are they going to do with this? Say that the Emperor's Aquila becomes a jetpack for Ferrus Manus? Are they going to say the Emperor's Halo becomes a frisbee for Sanguinius? What are they going to do going forward? Because they're clearly going to be quite creative in how they approach this topic. New to 40k, will you bring back Sanguinius, my fave? One day they will bring back Sanguinius. I think it's definitely likely that we'll see a Sanguinor model that is much larger than the old Sanguinor model and looks very similar to Sanguinius. But I don't think we'll see a properly returned Sanguinius for decades, which is probably longer than you were hoping for, I imagine. Also, there is one weird line in The End and the Death Volume 3. When Leto finds Sanguinius' body, he does note that it feels like there's no soul in there anymore. So I am wondering whether they're going to take that in the direction of Sanguinius' soul was shattered by Horus Lupercal. potentially. Bringing back Sanguinius would be a bad thing to do. His sacrifice will go to waste for nothing. Yeah, I think that it would probably undercut the sacrifice. So it would be cool to have him kind of come back in the end times, but I don't think he'll properly come back for a long time. I think a big thing to think about is they will probably create new items, like with the lion. Like they will probably make a bolter, an amulet, and any other item. That's true. You could go with things like amulets and rings. I definitely think we're going to see this kind of leaning more into the psychicness of the Primarchs, because I think the response to the lion's forest walking ability has been very popular. People really like the fact. But the question is, what are they going to get? I do think that Leman Russ will probably be far more like Odin when he returns. I think that's the obvious symbolism with Leman Russ, is to have him kind of transfer from being a Thor type figure to an Odin type figure. And so I imagine Leman Russ coming back with like some sort of lightning powers, or maybe he'll be wielding the Emperor's Spear and able to direct lightning at people, crazy stuff like that. Cloak to Corvus, so he can replace another piece of equipment which is focusing on stealth right now. Maybe, but I think his stealth ability is kind of natural. It's one of the reasons that Konrad Kurz really hates Corvus Corax. So it's said that Konrad Kurz doesn't actually hate his brothers except for Corvus Corax. And the reason for that is because Corvus Corax's stealth ability is just innately part of him. And so it's something that Konrad Kurz can never match, because it's basically that line from Batman, where Konrad Kurz is basically like, I have adopted the night, but Corvus was born into it. And so he hates Corvus Corax because of this and is incredibly jealous, which is quite funny. The idea that Konrad Kurz doesn't actually hate anyone is kind of an interesting statement in and of itself. There's also symbolism in terms of who gets what. G gets the sword as the avenging son. Lion gets the shield and is portrayed as the defender of the people. That's a great shout. The question is, what are the other roles of the Primarchs going to be? It's one of the reasons I think that seeing Vulcan or Jagatai Khan come back next would be more interesting, because they would have probably a more defined role within the Imperium. So Leman Russ is a fighter, Rogadorn is a builder. They're kind of similar to the Lion and Guilliman already. Vulcan probably makes his own hammer. That's the thing about Vulcan, I guess. It's quite hard, is that Vulcan makes his own stuff, and he does it very, very well. What could Vulcan get of the Emperor? Vulcan has his perpetual ability, so maybe something that kind of goes along with that. I see Vulcan coming back and being the technical master of the Imperium, realistically, and I think his purpose will be to save the Emperor. Jagatai Khan is the real wild card. They could do kind of anything with him. If you watch my video on Jagatai Khan, you'll know that I think Jagatai Khan basically abandoned the Imperium, and so I think maybe Jagatai Khan will get one of those big eagles. Probably be very symbolic to kind of talk about the fact that Jagatai has now returned to the Imperium, and he's no longer, roaming around the webway. I also do like the idea that one of the eagles becomes an actual eagle, and maybe it serves Jagatai Khan or someone somehow. We do see the White Scars use hawks. Jagatai Khan's nickname is the Warhawk, so I quite like the idea that Jagatai Khan just has a massive golden bird that he can have fly at people and stuff. Hammer for Vulcan, claw for Corvus, power fist or bolter for Dawn, spear for Russ, cape wings, jetpack for Khan. Or jetpack or like some sort of vehicle would be a great one for Khan. Like just him getting the Emperor's jet bike. That would make a lot of sense, to be fair. That would work. Rollerblades for Jagatai Khan. I'd love that. The Emperor's Crocs with rollerblades on. Oh, that'd be so good. Just like special sneakers would just be really cool. Loved your latest vid about the lion. Great, thank you so much, man. I never get stuff early, but technically everyone who bought the Dark Angels Codex got it early, because they released the Codex before they released the Codex. They released like a second version later on, which is the official release date. It's very strange. I don't know why they do it this way. But yeah, definitely buy that book if you're interested in the Dark Angels. I think Voldemort did a reading of it, actually, so you can check that out. What if instead of armor or weapons, one Primarch gets the Imperator Somnium? Would make more sense for a Primarch to get a ship rather than a shoulder plate. So I have bad news. The Imperator Somnian was destroyed during the Siege of Terra, very, very sadly. It does end up saving the Emperor's life, to be fair, but basically the Imperator Somnian is sacrificed to allow the Dark Angels under Corswain to reach Terra, and they end up saving the Astronomicon, and through faith kind of restarting the Astronomicon, the Emperor gets like the power boost that he needs, it's implied, to kill Horus. So I would love to see that ship back. I'm pretty certain it was the largest ship ever made by the Imperium. If they could bring it back somehow, some sort of warp shenanigans, I would be really up for that. That would be a great gift for a Primarch. The only appropriate biggie artifact for Vulcan would be an even bigger hammer than Dawnbringer. Yeah, I mean, Vulcan uses a different hammer in the Beast Arises series that I forget the name of. A hammer for Vulcan would make sense. Vulcan's quite hard purely because he kind of makes his own stuff. So Vulcan's hammers having their little pieces of tech within them are one of the things that make it so cool. I guess, people mentioned an amulet. Vulcan did create the Talisman of Seven Hammers, which I imagine he does still have. Its eventual purpose is to be a dead man switch for the Golden Throne, causing it to fail, which would create an inferno that takes Terra with it. So Horus was instructed by the Emperor to use this should it look like Horus is going to win, because at least this way the Emperor could deny Horus Terra. However, it is shown to have other abilities in addition. So it guides Vulcan back to Terra, and it was able to give a permanent death to a Great Unclean One of Nurgle. So it is a very strong relic, certainly. The Emperor clearly greatly trusts Vulcan's judgment because he gave Vulcan the task of deciding whether to destroy Terra or not, which is a pretty big deal. Didn't Sanguinius' soul get ripped apart by the Chaos Gods? Officially, it's not clear, but it might have been. Things come out of the ground and like clamour for Sanguinius, so maybe that's what that's representing. Did he mention the Armour Luminis? I guess that kind of counts as a gift from the Emperor. That was one part of the book that was really weird. So the line basically just kind of stumbles upon a planet and the people there go, "Oh, you're massive, aren't you? That's really funny that you say that because we have this massive gun that's too big for any of us to use. And it's said that the Emperor left this gun here 10,000 years ago. Did you want it?" And the Lion says, "Yeah." And that is how the Lion gets his gun in 40K, which is... I can't really fault Mike Brooks on too much because he had a lot to fit in that novel, to be fair. It's understandable. Dawn definitely has the Power Claw. I think it would be cool. Fulgrim can regrow a limb in Angel Exterminatus. Before he's a Demon Prince, he can regrow his limb when he's basically sniped. And it's not exactly clear whether that's the thing all Primarchs can do because Fulgrim is already under the sway of Slaanesh at that point. However, I wouldn't put it past the writers just to allow Dawn to regrow his limb. Yeah, it would be cool to see Dawn with like some sort of bionic hand. The Emperor's Halo. Yeah, the Emperor's Halo is an interesting one. I wonder what it would do. Perhaps it could... Jagatai Khan would actually be quite an interesting one. Again, maybe it could be the case that, that's the reason Jagatai comes back to the Imperium is because he's granted some sort of clarity from the Emperor's Wreath. Maybe it gives him that. That would have been a great gift for Guilliman, to be fair, but Guilliman got the sword. Vulcan can get a flamer. That would be cool, something flame related, or potentially, the Emperor has other guns that he hasn't seen. I do think that part of the fun for the designers is going to be to give the Primarchs weapons from like the classic Emperor art. I think that's part of it. So that's why I'm thinking the shoes, the anti-grav shoes from the Emperor, some sort of invisibility cloak. There's some animal skin here. There's a bunch of eagles everywhere. I think that's part of the fun for the designers, is to find ways they can kind of use the Emperor's armor to give gifts. I like the idea of the wreath on his head. I think that would be a great gift, potentially. You know, maybe curing a Primarch of their insanity. Maybe Vulcan's insanity comes back and that's how it gets cured. Something like that. That could be quite interesting. Weirdly, when they wrote Beast Arises, Vulcan was still insane. So he's a bit all over the place in those novels. However, later in the Heresy, Vulcan's insanity gets cured. So that was a slight kind of canon thing there. Vulcan gets the Fulgurite or Athame Dagger. So the Athame Dagger used to kill Horus is destroyed, but there are others that might come up. Fulgurite would absolutely work. I mean, to be fair, that would work in and of itself, just like a massive Fulgurite weapon, but not entirely sure what they would use it for, what would be the main purpose. There's not really a big evil perpetual in the setting right now, which is where you'd want to use it. Vulcan being the one to stabilize, fix the Golden Throne would be cool. Yes, definitely check out my Khan video if that interests you. Crown or hammer for Vulcan. Who gets the keys to Big E / Malcador's Klepto Horde of spiky Dark Age of technology tech? I think the Custodians is the answer to that question. So yeah, the Custodians do have access to all kinds of crazy stuff. Personally, I think Dawn getting the Claw isn't fluffy. Rush should get that. Dawn should get Armour, Khan the Cloak, Vulcan and Corax get something symbolic. I do get that with Dawn and the Cloak, like the Claw. I do think the Claw would probably be better for maybe Leman Russ. I'd probably go with Corvus. I think Corvus would just look epic to have one Golden Claw and then maybe the Whip or a Black Claw. It would just look really cool to me. But yeah, I get where you're coming from. Sanguinius' soul being gone is really interesting. We have seen him multiple times recently as a spirit, so I do not think they are going to retcon that. What I think maybe he merged with the Emperor. I think there's potential for maybe some sort of plot line around combining maybe all the parts of Sanguinius' soul apart from the bit within Mephiston into one, and then that is like a new version of the Sanguinor, something like that. It does make me wonder whether they're going for like a Sanguinius' soul was shattered type thing. If Ferrus Manus is alive, does he get the Emperor's bolter? I am very confident we will see Ferrus Manus when the Legion of the Damned come out. Whether he gets a model, I don't know. And whether he gets part of the Emperor's war gear, I don't know. I'm very confident we will see him at some point. It's quite a weird one where the Legion of the Damned haven't had any focus in the novels for a little while, but it is said in the Dawn of Fire series that the Legion of the Damned are actually pretty common now because the Emperor's power has grown so much that he's able to kind of summon them far more often. And Guilliman's actually like a bit concerned about that. Which Primarch, alive or dead, combined or alone, has the capability to learn how to fix the Golden Throne? Definitely Vulcan. I speak about this actually in my Jagged Arcana video, so I would check that out if you're interested. Omegon turns out to be a loyalist all along and gets Big E's. I'm not going to say that, but yeah, gets Big E. Actually, that is something I did want to talk about, actually. I forgot to write down, which is that weirdly, with the retcon to Guilliman having the Emperor's sword in 30k, potentially, and this is a wild theory and I have no reason to think this, but in my head, potentially this provides an avenue for how Omegon could survive the Scouring. So I don't really know why they retconned the position of the Emperor's sword. They didn't have to. But I wonder if this is why. Because if Guilliman kills Omegon with the Emperor's sword, perhaps Omegon doesn't like properly die and the Emperor somehow saves Omegon's soul, and that is an avenue to allow Omegon to return in 40k. Or I guess Omegon and Alfarius, because Omegon and Alfarius are one soul. They are one soul and two beings. They're not just twins. So I can't help but wonder whether that was the reason that they retconned the placement of the Emperor's sword. Khan gets a webway ship leading the hunt across the galaxy. Vulcan could get material to make his own piece of equipment. That's a really good call. I like that idea. Potentially, yeah, Vulcan just gets raw, auramite material and he is able to craft his own stuff. In theory, the Dark Angel's got the gauntlet, the Imperial Fist's got parts of the shoulder pad. Maybe some of it still survives and that's gifted to Vulcan. I like that idea. Doesn't Dawn's old hand have all the Imperial Fist chapter masters' names engraved in the bone? That'd be cool to implement with a bionic hand. Oh, you think actually just give Dawn his older hand back? I mean, it would be cool. It would be a very cool idea. Quite symbolic, I guess, the idea that all of those sacrifices of your sons over the last 10,000 years get kind of put into your body. That could be cool. Also, would it be a psychic halo, like a permanent shield? Potentially. Maybe you give the halo to Leman Russ then, because when Leman Russ comes back, undoubtedly a fight against Magnus the Red will come in quick succession, and Leman Russ struggles against Magnus the Red in just a one-on-one fight because of the fact that if you let Magnus do his thing, he is so psychically powerful. Basically, no one stands a chance. The feats of Magnus the Red, which is a video I did for the members. We go through like the most incredible things that Magnus has done, and nobody really comes close when it comes to the raw power of Magnus. However, if you give Leman Russ some sort of like a halo that provides some sort of psychic defense, I like that idea a lot. That would make a lot of sense. That's gone right on my list. Who suggested that? Blake Notta Donna. Great shout, mate. Dawnwood the Claw would be way cooler than Leman. As Horus said, Dawn's weakness is his walls. I would like to see Dawn in 40k that is more vengeful and attack oriented. That could be very cool. I mean, that is the story of the Iron Cage. It didn't go so well. Who's going to get the Emperor's vast pile of shame? Oh, wow. I mean, who's the fastest painter out of the Primarchs? Probably the Khan, I reckon, I want to say. He's just very fast. Do you think they're going to wait for the other Primarchs to come back before they start to reunite, or have them reunite one at a time? I think it'll be a mix. I do think the Lion and Guilliman are going to reunite in the near future, purely because their relationship is so interesting from my point of view. So I think it would be a bit of a shame to not have them reunite for a while, but I think after that it'll probably be a bit of a mix. Maybe the next two to come back, they'll link up, and then later those two will link up with the Lion and Guilliman. Probably be a bit of a mix, but I don't know. Who gets Malcador's staff? So Tigurius has a staff that is kind of implied to be Malcador's staff, because the staff whispers to Tigurius when he's fighting, and it's incredibly strong. It protects Tigurius in Shadows of Leviathan, I think the book is called, when Tigurius kind of has another little kind of battle with the hive mind. So it's very, very strong stuff. Of course, an Ultramarine gets Malcador's staff. This is from the time when the Ultramarines used to just get everything in the lore. It's where all the resentment comes from. Maybe the Fulgurite Athame could be used to permanently destroy Chaos Greater Demons / Traitor Primarch. I mean, if they kill a Traitor Primarch, that would be wild. Like, because it's a lot of money for Games Workshop to kill a Traitor Primarch. Where in the warp is this join button? It should just be on the page below. Every prediction so far is wrong because the Blood Ravens just get all the Emperor's gear, probably. You know what, Throne Choir? I wish I'd thought of that joke before you said it. That is so true. Of course the Blood Ravens will get it all. Absolutely. That's the way it's going to go down now, isn't it? Classic Blood Ravens joke, and it didn't come to me. This is what I get. Hello, I'm new in the Warhammer world. The stories are very impressive. Oh, great. Welcome. And I do have a beginner's video, so do check that out. I think there should be a link in the description. Is it established that G-Man had the sword during the scouring? Yes, he's put into stasis with the sword. I think in the reprint of Dark Imperium, he wields the sword versus Fulgrim, and in the original print, he just used his Gladius. And originally, Belisarius Cawl finds the sword in like an ice planet, if I remember correctly. But later on, yeah, they just kind of changed it. So, and I can't think as to why, unless you want to do something really funky, like, you know, allow Omegon to live. That's a wild theory. I have no reason to think this. I should stop saying it, but it's just, I thought it was cool. How big are lightning claws? It looks different depending on the rendition. Yes, they have shrunken lightning claws a lot, because in the older models, lightning claws are like also power fists. Could Vulcan be keeping vigil over the Void Dragon? I really like that theory. I can't remember if this is something I've mentioned already or whether we're just in sync, TJ. But yeah, I really like the theory that he is watching over the Void Dragons. I should say, or someone is watching over the Void Dragon out of the Primarchs, because the timelines are a bit weird here, but there is something that has to be done about the Void Dragon within Mars very soon, relative to the setting, because in the book Mechanicum, this is a classic example where Games Workshop in the Heresy go like, this is going to be fine for 10,000 years. They do this all the time. In the book Mechanicum, they sort out the problem of the Void Dragon for 10,000 years, at which point there'll need to be a new Guardian for Mars, and that takes us to 40k. So in theory, the Guardian from Mechanicum will be dead soon, and the Void Dragon would break out. Having a Primarch deal with the Dragon and Mars would be a pretty good reason to explain their absence. So I actually thought a very similar thing to you there, TJ. Maybe Vulcan's been building something that could contain it. I don't know. Who gets the Emperor's unopened books on parenting? I agree. Golden armor for Dawn. I mean, Dawn already has golden armor, so maybe just a little piece from the Emperor would be quite cool. Bolter for Dawn. He likes the standard equipment. That's true. Bolters are an Imperial Fist thing, especially. They love a bolter. What war gear does the Thief Trazyn have? That's a very good question. He could have all kinds of stuff. He could have half of it. We just don't know. What's your theory on Dawn's whereabouts? Dawn, I think, is probably the loyalist Primarch that they have the least figured out. Even the Iron Cage incident hasn't been written about for a long time. It's obviously like referenced, but the actual lore on it is like from 5th edition. We're currently on 10th edition, so they haven't revisited it. The circumstances around what the deal was with that Black Crusade, we just don't know. So is it at all related to Abaddon? Is it just like a Black Crusade, which is just like an incursion from Chaos? Is it connected at all to the disappearance of Sigismund? Sigismund also dies because of a Black Crusade. I just don't think they've got it down yet. Whereas when I talk about Vulcan or Jagatai Khan, we've kind of got the lore on their disappearance down. But in terms of theory, so the obvious thing is, of course, that he cut off his own hand to allow for his own escape, which would be wild. I think potentially some sort of secret mission for the Emperor. Maybe they'll revisit the lore around the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne and give the Emperor some sort of last words for Rogel Dawn. Rogel Dawn's purpose, of course, is building. He's the Praetorian. Potentially he is off building a perfect fortress somewhere. Maybe that'll come into play. Maybe he'll make a fortress that could replace Cadia. So if Belisarius Cawl closes the Great Rift, they put an equivalent of Cadia back. I'm literally spitballing. But yeah, I don't think they've figured out Dawn yet, being honest with you. But that is it for this stream. I stream every Wednesday for Freeview, and I also stream on Sunday for members. So do check me out there as well. Do let me know in the comments, is there anything else about the weapons and armor of the Emperor that you think that we've missed? Is there any other theories that you have around who is going to get what out of the Primarchs? I think that the designers are being pretty creative around what they're doing, as we saw with the lion and the shield. So I can't wait to see what they do next. And let's face it, we all just can't wait for more Primarchs to return, because it's just kind of awesome. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.